The wind carried the dust of Redstone Valley like a restless ghost that never found its grave. It was the summer of 1886, and the sun spread its heat over the land until even the shadows looked thirsty. At the far end of the crooked main street stood a small figure leaning on two wooden crutches. Her name was Alara Bluebird, aged 20, a native woman of quiet grace and stubborn hope. Her long black hair was braided with faded blue ribbons, and her moccasins whispered softly against the wood as she moved from one doorway to another. She had asked for work at the saloon, at the inn, even at the sheriff's wife's kitchen. Every time, the answer was the same: a shake of the head, a polite murmur, and a door closing too quickly. Her hands, scarred from years of cooking over open fires, clutched a small tin pot as if it carried her last piece of dignity. The smell of roasted corn still clung to her dress. She was known around town, but not kindly. Pretty, poor, and crippled, they'd say, as if beauty and brokenness couldn't share the same skin. Still, she smiled faintly to herself, the kind of smile that came from habit, not hope. There was one more ranch at the edge of town, one last door she hadn't knocked on. That door belonged to Cole Maddox, age 30, a man built like the mountains that framed Redstone. They called him the Giant. He wore a dark shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows and a gun belt slung low over worn brown trousers. His eyes were the color of cold coffee, steady, unreadable. Some said he was widowed. Others whispered he'd never loved at all. But no one denied his strength or the quiet grief that hung around him like a scent only he could smell. He stood on his porch, oiling his rifle, when Alara stopped at his gate. "Sir," she began, her voice trembling but clear, "I can cook. Please, give me a chance." Cole's gaze dropped to her crutches, then to her thin arms, then back to her eyes. "This ain't a charity ranch, miss. My men work hard and eat harder. You'd have to move fast." Her chin lifted, soft but firm. "I don't move fast, sir. But I cook better than any woman in this valley." He said nothing, only watched her for a moment that stretched like the horizon. Then he shook his head, muttered something low, and turned away. The door shut behind him with the heaviness of finality. That night, the wind rose fierce, bringing rain that cut through the heat. Cole sat by his fire, listening to the thunder crawl over the hills. He thought of her face, those eyes that didn't flinch when he said no. Somewhere outside, lightning split the sky, and in that flash, he saw smoke curling upward from near the old mill. Without thinking, he grabbed his hat and ran to his horse. He found her there, coughing through the haze, her little shack half-eaten by flame. She had tried to bake bread, using old kindling and wet wood. When the smoke grew too thick, she had dragged her pot outside and collapsed in the mud. Cole swung off his horse, scooped her up like she weighed nothing, and carried her through the downpour. "I was trying to prove I could," she whispered, her head against his chest. "You damn near proved yourself dead," he said, voice rough as gravel. But when she shivered, he wrapped his coat tighter around her. By morning, she woke in his cabin to the smell of coffee and rain-damp pine. His dog, Whiskey, slept by her crutches. Cole stood by the window, staring at the gray sky. When he saw her stir, he nodded toward the kitchen. "You said you could cook. Let's see it." Her fingers trembled as she gathered what she found: cornmeal, salt, a little bacon, and half a jar of honey. She moved slow, steady, like a prayer spoken under her breath. The smell of sizzling butter filled the room, curling around the edges of silence. When she placed the plate before him, Cole took one bite, then another. "It's good," he said finally. "Too good for one man." She smiled faintly. "Then let me earn my keep." He nodded once. "You've got yourself a job, Miss Bluebird." In that moment, something quiet and invisible passed between them, like the air before the first snowfall, still, fragile, full of promise. The days turned long and golden. Alara's cooking filled the ranch with warmth the men didn't know they'd been missing. Biscuits rose high, coffee tasted sweeter, and laughter came easier. Cole found himself lingering near the kitchen more often, pretending to need water, or nails, or nothing at all. Sometimes he'd find her humming, her voice soft as river wind. When she caught him watching, she'd blush and look away, and he'd clear his throat like a man who'd forgotten how to speak. He fixed her crutches one evening without telling her, sanding the wood until it was smooth as polished stone. When she found them leaning by her door, she traced the grain with her fingers and smiled. She mended his torn shirts in return, stitching care into every line. Neither spoke of it, but both knew. Yet the town never forgot to whisper. "The giant's pitying the cripple," they'd say behind her back. The words hurt, even when she told herself they didn't. Sometimes, late at night, she'd stare at her reflection in the window, her thin frame, her uneven gait, and wonder if Cole saw her as fragile or fierce. One morning, as the first frost silvered the grass, Cole leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "They're holding the Redstone cook-off again," he said. "You should enter." She laughed softly, bitterly. "They wouldn't let me near their tables." "They will," he replied. "And when they do, you'll show them what strength looks like." 4 days she refused. Fear and pride warred quietly in her chest. But Cole's faith in her never wavered. "You taught me," he said one night by the fire, "that doing what's hard is worth more than doing what's expected." His eyes held hers, and she felt her defenses melt like butter on a hot skillet. When the day came, she dressed in her best blue dress and polished her crutches until they gleamed. The whole town gathered around the square, stalls lined with pies, meats, and all the gossip Redstone could carry. She stood at her table, hands trembling, heart louder than the crowd. Cole stood nearby, hat tipped low, pride glowing in his stillness. She began to cook, corn stew thickened with smoked herbs and a drizzle of wild honey. The scent spread through the air, cutting through laughter and mockery alike. The judges came, tasted, paused. Then one of them smiled, eyes wide with surprise. When her name was called, there was silence, then applause that grew like thunder. Cole lifted his hat, and for a moment, Ilara forgot every door that had ever closed on her. She had opened her own. That evening, the sky burned orange, fading into violet. Cole built a fire outside and set a lantern on the porch. "Ilara," he said, his voice unsteady in a way she'd never heard, "I don't know much about fancy words, but I can't imagine a day without your cooking or your company." Her eyes widened as he pulled a small silver ring from his pocket. "You sure you want a woman who walks slow?" she whispered. He smiled softly. "Darlin', I've been runnin' all my life. Maybe it's time I learned to walk." The wind fell silent, as if listening. He knelt, and she said yes with tears shining like stars. They married under the cottonwood trees, their branches heavy with white fluff that drifted like snow. The townsfolk gathered, some out of curiosity, others out of change. Ilara wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself. Cole stood beside her in his best black shirt. When the preacher declared them husband and wife, he kissed her gently, and the valley seemed to breathe. That night, laughter filled the cabin. Cole lifted her in his arms, spun her once, and whispered, "You were never broken, Ilara. You were the fire I'd been missing." Years slipped by like gentle rivers. The ranch grew prosperous, the kitchen busier. Ilara's crutches leaned by the wall, always close, always part of her. Travelers came from distant towns to taste her food, cornbread sweet as mercy, stew rich as memory. Sometimes she'd look out at the setting sun, her heart full of the kind of peace that doesn't ask for permission. Each morning, Cole sat on the porch with his coffee, watching her hum to herself as the fire crackled. He no longer saw the crutches or the limp, only the woman who had taught him that love isn't about fixing what's broken but cherishing what endures. When the next cook-off arrived, she entered again, this time with no hesitation, no fear. And when she won, she smiled at the applause but turned to Cole, who simply nodded, because he knew she didn't need the world's approval anymore. Years later, travelers who passed through Redstone still spoke of the woman with wooden crutches and the giant who loved her. They said their ranch smelled like cinnamon and wild honey, and that laughter was the strongest sound there. Some swore that when the wind blew through the cottonwoods, you could still hear her voice, soft, strong, singing to the dawn. And if you asked the oldest among them what their secret was, they'd say this: she didn't win him by walking straight, she won him by standing tall. Because love, real love, isn't about perfection. It's about patience, courage, and the taste of something honest shared between two souls who've seen the storm and still choose the sunrise. Some nights, when the valley lies quiet and the stars burn low, it's said you can still smell cornbread and coffee drifting through the air, as if reminding every passerby that every soul, no matter how scarred, deserves one chance: to be seen, to be loved, to be home.